Hi, everyone. So today we have for the next session, Kevin Owocki. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that right, Kevin. He's the CEO and founder of Gitcoin, and he'll be talking about quadratic funding today. Over to you, Kevin.
All right, thanks so much. Let me just figure out how to share my screen real quick and we can roll right into my presentation. Alrighty, so hi everyone, my name is Kevin Owocki and I am presenting about quadratic funding, and WTF is quadratic funding. You may know me as the founder of Gitcoin, which is a place that you can get coins if you're a software engineer in the blockchain space. Also a member of the Boulder, Colorado crypto community, and Gitcoin is proudly funded by Consensus. So thank you to Joe and Consensus for believing in Gitcoin before anyone else did. Quadratic funding is a mechanism for funding public goods. So basically, there's different categories of goods that can be supported in a market. We're more used to things like private goods, things like food, clothes, consumer items. And as opposed to private goods like those things, public goods are non-excludable and non-rivalrous, which just means that everyone can consume them without excluding other people from consuming them. So things like clean air and clean water are public goods, because if you live in a city that has those things, then you can consume them without like paying Jeff Bezos something. National infrastructure, so basically like roads, electric grids, things like that are typically things that are public goods. Privacy in the digital age is something that's a public good, something that you can consume without others being able to be presented from consuming it. And so quadratic funding is a mechanism for funding these type of goods with a marketplace. And it's quadratic funding that I think is super powerful for bootstrapping blockchain ecosystems, and that's why we're going to talk about it today. So basically, the history of quadratic funding is that Vitalik Buterin, the founder of Ethereum, got together with Zoe Hitzig and Glenn Weil from the Radical Exchange community, and we're talking about different ways to fund public goods in a post-industrial age. So basically, like, how do you fund public goods with a marketplace as opposed to just with like taxation? And they came up with this idea called quadratic funding. And basically what quadratic funding is it's a math formula. There it is, end of presentation. This is the formula. This is what quadratic funding is. I'm just kidding. Quadratic funding is a formula, and if you're not into reading Greek symbols, it's the mathematically optimal way to fund public goods in a democratic community. So just unpack that. Mathematically optimal, so basically the best way to democratically fund public goods. So to optimize for the preferences of the poor and the many, as opposed to the rich and the few. And so basically what it is a formula for distributing a matching pool to a set of projects. And basically the way quadratic funding works is, I'm going to just kind of break out of my presentation right here. I'm going to show you a calculator that the Gitcoin team has built along with some of our friends in the community, called WTFisQF.com. And basically this is kind of our landing page where if we want to explain quadratic funding to someone and we don't want to make them read the 30-page economic paper, then we can explain it to them really quick. And by the way, you should read the quadratic funding paper. It's really amazing work, but I'll just explain to you very briefly how it works right here. So we've put together this calculator that allows us to sort of like simulate what a quadratic funding round would look like. So basically you run a matching campaign contemporaneously, which just means at the same time, as a crowdfunding campaign, and you distribute the match amounts of the central pot according to the crowdfunding campaign's results. And the powerful thing about quadratic funding is that if you give the same amount to two different grants, but one grant is supported by a wider base of the community, then that project gets way, way, way more of the matching funds. And there's a bunch of math behind this, but basically the TLDR is that for projects that have a really strong matching amount, or sorry, very strong broad base of support, the estimated match for an incremental donation to this project can be super high. So basically a $10 donation can be matched by $70 to $200, depending on how broadly supported that project is by the community. So this is the reason, this is the secret behind quadratic funding. It's the math. The number of contributors to a project matters more than the amount funded. And this pushes power to the edges, away from whales and other central power brokers, and creates more democracy in funding public goods. So that's really exciting, because that's what we're looking to do, is we're looking to have more democratic ways of funding these public goods, and to have more market-driven ways of funding public goods. So quadratic funding is happening now. This is gitcoin.co/grants. And it's basically a crowdfunding platform that allows you to fund different projects in the Ethereum, Filecoin, Cartesi ecosystems, and basically to pay directly in crypto. And so the cool thing about quadratic funding, both in theory and in practice on Gitcoin grants, is that a $1, one DAI or $1 contribution can get a $64 matching. So the cool thing about that is that it really kind of gets you over this free rider problem that have existed in public goods for a long time. The free rider problem can just sort of be stated as, well, if I'm already getting open source software, clean water, and clean air, why would I bother taking out my wallet and paying for these things? I can get them anyway. And so there's this behavioral minima that we get into called the free rider problem, which is basically that, oh, I can just get away with free riding on public goods. But then we move into this collective problem where if everyone free rides, then the public goods system collapses, because there's too many people free riding and not enough people supporting it. And so Gitcoin sort of in quadratic funding moves the Schelling point of supporting open source software closer towards people actually pitching in to vote with their dollars on which projects they actually care about. And it's a way that you can get coins in exchange for your software development work in the ecosystem. So basically, the history of quadratic funding on Gitcoin is that we've done about 9 rounds so far of quadratic funding. I'm just going to kind of walk you through what quadratic funding on Gitcoin has been in the past. Basically, round 1 in Q1 2019, we did about 200 contributions and raised about $40,000. And this graph right here that you see sort of wiggling around on your screen is the preference map of all of the contributors to the projects. So every edge in that graph is a transaction, and every node is a user or a grant in the round. And as I roll through this, you can see in round 2, when we raised 60K, that preference map graph gets a little bit denser. And as we roll into round 3, then we're starting to get even more data about what people in the community actually care about. Round 4 did about 5,000 contributions for about $400,000 raised. Round 5, about 500K raised through 8,000 contributions. And we've gone through round 6 and round 7, who have done roughly $1 million per round in the last couple rounds. So basically, this is a way for us at Gitcoin to use quadratic funding to drive completion of our mission, which is to enable any software developer out there to work for the open internet. Open source software funds so much in the ecosystem, and it isn't properly supported. It is a public goods problem. There's $500 billion per year in value that's created by open source software, and there's just people who are working on it nights and weekends away from their family, and because it's a passion for them, and it's something that they can't do to support their family. And we want to turn that around. We want people to be able to quit their jobs in private goods and to be paid for just working for the open internet. And that's our mission at Gitcoin. So far, we've done about $15 million worth of rewards for open source software. And I'm super proud that there are about a half a dozen to a dozen people that have quit their jobs and are now working off of the money that they get off of Gitcoin grants and Gitcoin's ecosystem. And so we're not stopping there. We're actually taking quadratic funding and we're bringing it into new ecosystems and new arenas. We're working on a project called Downtown Stimulus, which is basically a way of using quadratic funding to support local downtowns that have been harmed by coronavirus. This project, downtownstimulus.com, basically takes Quadratic Funding, the exact same thing that's working really well on Gitcoin and Gitcoin grants, and brings it to a more mainstream audience. And I'm proud to say that round one of Downtown Stimulus we did in the middle of last year, and we were able to raise $40,000 for downtown businesses in Boulder, Colorado. So proved that Quadratic Funding works outside of just the Web3 open source ecosystem, and that this could be basically a fundamental economic primitive in the post-blockchain internet for supporting public goods. We're bringing Quadratic Funding to a bunch of other ecosystems: Zcash, Matic, now Polygon, Polkadot, Zilliqa, Celo are all going to be hopefully launching Quadratic Funding rounds on Gitcoin in the next several months. And, I'm super proud to say that Gitcoin has become a significant pillar of the Ethereum ecosystem, according to members of the Ethereum Foundation. And I think that, we owe a lot to the open source software that we're built on, and to Vitalik and Zoe and Glenn for giving us Quadratic Funding. And I hope that this helps us fulfill our mission of working for the open internet. Because I want to build a world that has more democracy built into it. And I think that the internet is a tool that we can do that. So basically, if we think about what humanity is in the future, in the information age, are we going to be a dictator-driven network species, or maybe sort of one that derives its power from a series of oligarchs? Or are we going to move to a more democratic type of environment in which we all sort of work peer-to-peer for each other, or for people in our local communities, or a completely peer-to-peer network species? And so one of the cool things about Quadratic Funding is that we can optimize for the preferences of our democratic communities, as opposed to power brokers that have traditionally controlled distribution of public goods and funding and everything in the community. And that's the key thing here, is that we're all these beautiful, diverse, three-dimensional humans from all over the world that all have these values of financial sovereignty. And the expression of the preference map in Quadratic Funding for what goods do we actually care about, and what things do we actually want to be funded in Quadratic Funding, is just the most beautiful thing in the world to me. That we can have people from all over the world, every race, every creed, lots of different nationalities, and they're all caring about a global public goods problem together. And I think that that's really more profound than I can articulate after my first cup of coffee here at 8 a.m. in Colorado. So that's WTF QF is, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation and my fun little graphics here. Would love to take some questions from the audience, depending on what people are interested in hearing about.
Thanks, Kevin. Hands down, the best presentation that I've seen.
Oh, thanks. We have amazing designers in the community, not just developers. So I got to give them credit.
Yeah. Darnell is asking, I love this. Can we begin to use this formula with NFTs?
Yeah, so the formula is totally open source, and it's just an economic paper that anyone can use. And I am happy to, I'm happy to have you bend my ear and get any experiment that you want off the ground. So just reach out to me on Twitter if you want feedback on how to roll something out. We actually are going to be running so Gitcoin Grants Round 9. I should have put this into the presentation. I need to be like a better marketer, but Gitcoin Grants Round 9 starts on Wednesday, and we're going to have $500,000 worth of funding for open source projects in the Ethereum space. And 50K of that is going to go to NFT infrastructure and NFT artists. So we are going to be funding some NFTs with Quadratic Funding very shortly. But if anyone else wants to run an experiment with Quadratic Funding, you don't need my permission. You're absolutely welcome to get something off the ground.
Perfect. Kevin, you also touched upon this Quadratic Funding coming to local businesses also, and how is that legally compliant, and is it like like we have seen crowdsourced funding in the past with ICOs and IDOs and IEOs? How is this different?
Yeah, so with an ICO, basically, as I understand it, Gitcoin does not have a token, and we have never done an ICO. But as I understand it, when you do an ICO, you give money to a development team and they issue tokens back to you. With Quadratic Funding, there is no quid pro quo. It's just, I'm funding this project and I hope that they do really well and I'll keep consuming their public goods, but there's no exchange of a token back. And so there's no investment of money with the expectation of profit. And so I don't know where everyone that's watching this presentation is, but at least here in the United States, charitable and infrastructure funding is not subject to the same regulatory apparatus as like private investment funding.
All right. So these local businesses are mostly charitable businesses, are they?
No. So basically, these local businesses, we had Time Warp Comics in downtown Boulder. We had a coffee shop. We had a restaurant. We had a bookstore. And basically, they're all private businesses. But in aggregate, the idea is that having a livable downtown in your local community is a public good, like somewhere that you can take your kids and, you know, there's like safety all around you and there's like an active economic environment. That in itself is a public good. So you kind of have to bend your mind a little bit to think about how a lot of these projects that we're supporting may have business models and they're not like totally charitable, but they also are supporting like a common good as well. Now the distinction between like an ICO and what Gitcoin Grants is that you're just giving money to these businesses because you want to see them thrive and you know that they're hurting because of coronavirus. But you're not returning, you're not getting any shares of those businesses back. And that's what makes it not a security offering.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And all of this is all based on like the crowd, wherever the crowd wants the money to go, that's where the money goes, is it? Yeah.
And that's what's powerful about it. It's not some central power broker who's never actually interacted in the community that's deciding where the money goes. It's your peers deciding whether or not you get funded, not some power broker.
Exactly. So yeah, someone's asking, what's the project that has come out of Gitcoin or Quadratic Funding you're most excited about? Like, can you name a couple of them or one perhaps?
Oh man, you can't make me choose between all of the children. I have a special place in my heart for a couple different categories of Gitcoin grants. You know, the headline one is that like Uniswap and Yearn Finance and 1inch Exchange are Gitcoin grants alumni. Like freaking multi-billion-dollar networks that like help survive. Like we were the pilot light of the bear market for some projects. And, you know, I don't want to speak for those projects. Like they probably would have survived the bear market anyway, but you know, it's our goal to be the pilot light through the bear market for a lot of people who are building. So, you know, Uniswap, 1inch Exchange and Yearn are one category. I think that people who are building layer 2 technology and layer 1 technology have a special place in my heart because just that infrastructure work is super hard to fund and it's super hard technical work to do. And I think the third answer to your question, so Uniswap and company, like layer 1 and layer 2 infrastructure are the first two answers. And then layer 3 is I'm super proud that we're kind of like funding journalists in the space. So basically like ETHub, The Daily Gwei by Anthony Sassano, Week in Ethereum are all being partially funded by Gitcoin grants. And, you know, I just think that like maybe advertising isn't the right business model for journalism in a post-blockchain internet. And we can just use Quadratic Funding to fund journalism and we'll get less clickbait and we'll get more hard-hitting stories that actually add value to the community. So, you know, I can't choose between all of them, but those categories are the ones that I'm most excited about. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we write for Cointelegraph also now and then, and I write on Cointelegraph. Like it's just they're just a lot of, I mean, if I may say so, like they're driven by a lot of revenue coming from the advertisers, and sometimes they prioritize them, and sometimes they push their banners and emails and PRs and all of that stuff.
Yeah, which is not fun. Like it's fine if that's an innovative project that's advertising there. What I don't like is that in the bull market, we start to see this frothy environment where when the scams start coming out, you know, you don't want them advertising on your property. And so just creating those right incentive alignments is what I'm passionate about.
Wow, that's very interesting, Kevin. Like the journalist bit really excited me. So if I may ask, like a lot of developers are participating in this hackathon also, and they'll be building projects. So how can they get started? Like once they build the project, how can they come on Gitcoin? How can they get started with it?
Yeah, so Gitcoin is a place that you can get coins if you're a software engineer. And so if your project is contributing to the public good and your project is baked enough that you're ready to show it to people, go to gitcoin.co/grants and click on new grant, and you can upload a new grant into the system and raise money from your peers, not from power brokers. So basically, we have quarterly quadratic funding campaigns. The next one is starting on Wednesday. And basically, you can host the grant on Gitcoin at any time, but the majority of the contributions will come during these quadratic funding rounds. So get in your grant creation by Wednesday of this week, and there's going to be a $500,000 matching pool and probably 30,000 contributions over the next month or so to various projects in the ecosystem. So just look at us as a way that you can get coins.
Got it. Makes sense. Um, yeah, so I want to ask one question since you touched upon layer one and layer two a little bit also. So we've been having this discussion with the various speakers, and we've gotten all sorts of answers. Which is very interesting, of course. So right now, all the DeFi projects are on Ethereum. Like there's just probably more than 98% of them are on Ethereum. How do you see the transition from Ethereum to other layer one solutions or layer two solutions of these DeFi projects because of the high gas fees? And also to follow up on that question, do you think this high gas fees will eventually go away with Ethereum 2.0 coming in?
Yeah, great questions. I have a couple thoughts about this. So our mission is to grow open source, and there are a lot of open source blockchain ecosystems, but we did get our start in Ethereum. So I just want to kind of like state my bias before I answer your question. Ethereum's decentralization, or sorry, Ethereum's scalability architecture is basically start off with Ethereum being live right now, and then you add layer 2 on top of Ethereum, and like Gitcoin's integrated with the ZK Sync, for example, which is a layer 2 provider in the Ethereum ecosystem. So Vitalik's whole vision, as I understand it, or I'm sorry, I should say the Ethereum Foundation's vision, is you can do on the order of thousands of transactions with just the existing layer 1. If you integrate a layer 2 right now, you can do millions of transactions I think it's per second. And then we can do like tens of millions once ETH2 launches. So what I've been telling everyone is like, just use a layer 2 and Ethereum scales today. You don't even have to wait for ETH2. And then the second thing is that the Ethereum community is reforming the fee markets with EIP 1559 to make them a little bit more sane. So I think that that's going to help things a lot. But one of the sort of existential questions that I don't really know is that there's a lot of tribalism in the crypto communities. And I think it's because we all hold like bags of different blockchain networks and want to see more adoption on top of those blockchain networks. But it's kind of funny to contrast that with the internet, where like I'm sitting here in Colorado. I think y'all are you in India? Yeah, we don't think about where the packets go in between. Like, you know, we're not like tribal around like, oh, my packets are going to some ISP in Denver, and then they're going like across the ocean into like somewhere in India, and like, because it's very like atomic for packets to go through the internet and infrastructure, like do a trace route between me and you. And what I'm really curious about is like, if we can build atomic swaps into these blockchain ecosystems, where like, if I want to get my Ethereum based assets onto Near, then I basically like think about the trace route of those assets routing through those blockchain networks. Like if we can build more atomic swaps in between these blockchain networks, maybe people will be less tribal, and the network effects of Ethereum and DeFi can be extended to other layer 1 protocols. So I don't know, TLDR, I'm not a maximalist and I'm discovering it as much as everyone else is, but I just think it's really interesting that these networks have adoption at all, you know, to have to think about how we scale them. It's a really great problem to have.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. But like, again, interoperability is probably like the future, and that is happening with Polkadot, Cardano, and Ethereum are now interoperable with each other. So probably like we have Kawas and Nears of the future will also start doing that. That'd be great. So, and Kevin, my last question to you would be like, you know, you have a lot of hackathon experience and you have not touched upon it, but Gitcoin also hosts a lot of hackathons and keep doing them time and time again, and a lot of exciting prizes, of course, with it. Do you have any advice for our developers who are going to start building from the 10th they have 10 days.
Yeah. So I have a computer science degree. I've been hacking on stuff for like 20 years, 15, 20 years at this point. I mean, my basic thing is like when I'm hacking, I like to try to be more extroverted at the start of a hackathon and like talk to people and try to do customer research on my idea and make sure that it's something that people want before I actually dive into the code. Right. And I think that a lot of hackers need to get out of their head and they need to do customer research before they start building something. Because the worst thing in the world is that you spend 4 days or however long on a hackathon working on someone and no one cares at the end of it because it's not something that solves a problem for people. And I've been through that pain myself. And so if I can save your hackers that pain by asking them to do a little bit of customer research first, then I think that, you know, hopefully we can avert some of that stuff. But that's been my experience, and I'm wishing luck to all the hackers out there as they're building in this weird, wonderful world of DeFi.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kevin, for taking out the time. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Good luck with the Gitcoin and Quadratic Funding. Bye bye.
See you later. Bye.